When we think of specific wrestling promotions, names often jump out as synonymous with them, whether they're wrestlers who stayed solely with one major company, like John Cena or The Rock, or they worked in others on the come-up, like Steve Austin and The Undertaker, who both passed through WCW. All of those, it could be argued, are WWE guys. Another name that comes to mind as a WWE guy would be Shawn Michaels. Having first joined the company in 1987, Shawn, the former sexy boy, is still there today training the most beautiful of rosters in NXT. It still hasn't stopped being weird to me yet that the two men who were the anti-authority degenerates of the 90s are now running creative and developmental for the entire company. There were times, however, when Shawn wrestled for other companies, sometimes while under a WWE contract. In this video, we'll look at as many of those times as I could find, as well as an indie match he had for his own training school in 2000. We'll also look at something that I glossed over in my last video about Shawn from around the same time, the back injury that kept him away from WWE in-ring action, an injury that some people question even to this day. There were times, for various reasons, that Shawn wrestled for other promotions during his WWE tenure. In 1991, Shawn and tag partner in the Rockers Marty Jannetty would complete 2 tours in Japan for SWS. Super World of Sports is a pretty fascinating story unto itself. It was only around for a couple of years, but it was a big money project that even co-promoted with WWE in the Tokyo Dome, and would frequently use their talent throughout its time in business. On January 11th, 92, the famous barbershop window incident aired on television, where Shawn turned on Marty by throwing him headfirst through the window of the barbershop set. Days before this would air, Shawn would take part in a few dates with SWS, this time without Marty. Perhaps a sign of things to come, had fans been able to know what was going on across the world right away, like we do today. Later in the 90s, Shawn would wrestle a handful of matches for the USWA. One such match that occurred on March 30th, 93, would feature Shawn defending his Intercontinental title against Lawler, who was also defending his USWA Unified World Heavyweight title. As you can likely imagine, with 2 different companies' belts on the line, this match ended in Lawler winning by DQ, and neither belt changed hands. Many WWE stars of the time would work matches in Memphis, including Bret Hart and Undertaker among others. One final instance would occur on August 4th, 1995, where Shawn would defend his Intercontinental title again, this time at Smoky Mountain Wrestling's Super Bowl of Wrestling event. Shawn would retain his title against Buddy Landel, who was being managed by Jim Cornette. As you might imagine, Shawn would hold on to the title, pinning Buddy after Sweet Chin Music, but not before Jim Cornette tried to attack Shawn with his tennis racket to cost him the title. Looking back though, the most interesting part of this perhaps is Shawn working for Jim Cornette. This match would have taken place before any of the later issues that the SMW promoter would have with Shawn, issues that likely began through Jim being the manager of Shawn's WWE opponents, most notably Vader, and also later issues behind the scenes, when Cornette was part of the booking committee. In recent years, Jim, not known as the kind of man to leave the past behind him, has been very outspoken in his unwillingness to forgive Shawn Michaels for his infamous poor behaviour in the late 90s. While I'm talking about Smoky Mountain Wrestling, by the way, also on this same card as Shawn Michaels wrestled on, The Undertaker would defeat at the time a lesser known Unabomb, the man who would go on to be known as Kane. From the time Shawn became a main event player in WWE, winning his first World Championship in March of 96, and for the rest of his career to date, Shawn has been exclusively a WWE wrestler. Well, almost. On April 4th, 2000, Shawn would wrestle a match outside of WWE. The promoter? Himself. Kind of. During Shawn's wilderness years away from WWE full-time, in '99 he formed his own wrestling school, the Texas Wrestling Academy. Despite owning the school, Shawn has been described as a fairly hands-off trainer, leaving the in-ring action to Rudy Boy Gonzalez, who still promotes shows and trains under the name Texas Wrestling Entertainment. The most successful graduate by a far margin being multi-time world champion for Ring of Honor, WWE and All Elite Wrestling, Bryan Danielson. To my knowledge, Bryan might be the only world champion of a major promotion that Shawn had a hand in training. Other notable trainees include WWE stars Brian Kendrick, Paul London and Lance Cade. In other promotions, there was Shawn Hernandez, who had successful runs in TNA as an original member of LAX. Another of his trainees was Matt Bentley, who was Shawn's cousin. While Matt achieved some success in TNA, wrestling as both Matt Bentley and before that Michael Shane, especially in the early years of the X Division, Bentley never quite got a decent push, despite the Heartbreak Kid's name being dropped at every opportunity. On April 4th, 2000, Shawn got in the ring and wrestled a match for TWA against Venom, most famously known as Paul Diamond, and also known as the man who portrayed Max Moon in the WWE in the early 90s. Paul Diamond, who started wrestling in the mid-80s like Shawn, was very much nearing the end of his career by 2000. During that time, he'd wrestled for many a major company. He also wrestled under several names and gimmicks, such as Haito in WCW and Kato in WWF, one half of the Orient Express. Diamond, as part of this team, would work with Shawn and Marty Jannetty several times, perhaps most notably at the 1991 Royal Rumble event, but it turns out the two go much further back than this. Paul actually talked about this in an interview with Hannibal TV, claiming that he and Michaels teamed as the American Force back in 1985, when Shawn was only 1 year into his career. The team lasted 7 months in Texas All-Star Wrestling, even winning tag team championships, before Shawn left for the AWA. Speaking on what Shawn was like back then, Paul claimed that Shawn was difficult to work with even then, recounting a story about him getting mad when Diamond tried some of his moves in a match to make them seem like more of a tag team. This is clearly something he got over when teaming with Marty, as the Rockers were well known for their tandem offense. According to a 2001 article from Slam Sports, Diamond joined Shawn's academy in July of '99 to be a head trainer before it met financial problems. Before I get into the match that Shawn had for TWA, there's one thing that I didn't mention much in my last video about Shawn Michaels appearing in FMW in '99 that also plays a part here. At the 1998 Royal Rumble, Shawn faced The Undertaker in a casket match. At one point in the match, Taker throws Shawn out of the ring, over the casket, and his back awkwardly clips the edge of the wooden box on his way down. This has been claimed many times by Shawn, and through WWE's telling of his career, to be the catalyst for his 4-year absence from the wrestling rings. It would end up being his penultimate match, with his last match being at WrestleMania 14, where he lost the WWE title to Steve Austin. He was at one point scheduled to wrestle in an 8-man tag team match at No Way Out of Texas in February, but was replaced on the night by a man who D-Generation X had been hiring to do their dirty work in recent weeks, Savio Vega. Let's look at the week-by-week discussion of Shawn's injury that took place in the Wrestling Observer newsletter. In Dave Meltzer's review of the casket match at the Royal Rumble, he makes mention of the moment where the back injury may have occurred, noting that it was early in the match. Said Dave, Michaels took one incredible bump early, taking a backdrop over the top rope and cracking his lower back on the casket as he went over. He was really lucky he wasn't hurt on that one. That at least tells us that on the night there may not have been much indication that he was injured. This is probably fair, given that the match ended up lasting 20 minutes, and Shawn kept going despite the bump happening early on. In the following week's issue, Dave writes that in the days after the match, Michaels' lower back stiffened up, stemming from that first backdrop where his lower back hit the casket early in the Royal Rumble match with Undertaker. They're hopeful he'll be back for January 31st, although it's a day-to-day deal. A couple of weeks later, right after the No Way Out pay-per-view, Dave began to treat the back injury with more suspicion. In the February 23rd, '98 issue, he wrote, "In timing that is being considered by many as easily predictable, WWF champion Shawn Michaels was diagnosed on February 11th, or just 4 days before the pay-per-view, as having 2 herniated discs in his lower back, supposedly aggravated by weight training the previous day. Dave goes on to note that the date of the diagnosis is just 2 days off the 1-year anniversary of the infamous segment on Raw where Shawn surrendered the WWE title, claiming that he had lost his smile. The real reason was that he claimed his knee was injured, but either way he gave up the WWE title and didn't defend it at WrestleMania 13. Dave also notes that Shawn was treated with cortisone shots and was essentially bedbound through the week of the pay-per-view. By the time March arrived and WrestleMania 14 was less than a month away, the suspicion was more widespread. In the March 2nd Observer, Dave wrote, "Within the industry nobody believes he was injured as badly as he claims. Although at this point, even if he was, nobody would believe it. There were kinds of stories that when he was supposed to have been bedridden the day of the pay-per-view, that he was riding around all afternoon on a friend's motorcycle. It also seemed that the fans weren't buying his injury either, as this letter from an Observer reader in the March 9th issue shows. It's time for Shawn Michaels to do another job, so it didn't come as much of a surprise to hear he's complaining of an injured back. Maybe the injury is legit, but at this point, I don't even care. He's forfeited so many titles I've lost count." It seems then that not long after the injury took place, nobody had a lot of trust in Shawn Michaels anymore. This continued even into the following year, and the FMW referee appearance he made, which I talked about in a previous video. When you watch him in that match, Shawn doesn't appear to be suffering all that much as he vaults in and out of the ring. Granted, actual wrestling is very different and much more strenuous, but he even manages to hit sweet chin music at one point and doesn't seem hurt at all. One final thing of note is a comment that I found in the February 14th 2000 edition of the Wrestling Observer. Said Dave, "Jim Ross met with Shawn Michaels over Super Bowl weekend when he was in San Antonio doing the interview with Austin. Michaels expressed an interest in returning to television, but nothing was decided, but was also trying to get some of his wrestlers' looks. As far as rumors going everywhere of Michaels wrestling at WrestleMania, or even returning as an in-ring performer. At the meeting, Michaels said that his back problems had worsened, and neither side had brought up the possibility of him wrestling." As Dave notes in the following week's Observer, Lance Cade, Shooter Schultz, American Dragon, and Spanky got a tryout match on the February 8th SmackDown tapings in Austin, Texas, and the WWF offered all 4 of them developmental contracts. The more interesting bit, however, is where he says that Shawn told WWE that his back injury had worsened, roughly 6 weeks before his TWA match would take place. The story going into the match is that Venom had taken over TWA as its new owner, and the promotion's one savior would be the Heartbreak Kid. The story had played out for weeks on TWA's short-lived TV show, Total Impact. At their March 21st 2000 TV taping, Just Incredible would win the TWA Championship in a dog collar ladder match against Venom with help from Shawn Michaels. No sooner than he won it, however, he would surrender the title, as he was already the ECW Tag Team Champion with Lance Storm. Ah, that famous Ultimate Warrior rule, where he couldn't hold 2 belts at once, that has long since disappeared. Not exactly. Credible claimed he was too busy defending his ECW title to also be a champion in TWA. Credible would hand the title to Shawn Michaels as a way of getting to the Venom match, as Venom would put his ownership of the company on the line to get a shot at Shawn's championship. Shawn would make the match a bunkhouse brawl, noting that his back wouldn't stand up to a full-on wrestling match. The bunkhouse brawl, which was also being advertised as Shawn's final match, would finally take place on April 4th 2000 at the Far West Rodeo in San Antonio, Texas. Shawn Michaels comes out curiously without the TWA Championship belt. As the match begins, the two quickly brawl to the outside, with Venom pushing Shawn back first into a guardrail. The commentator, who works about as hard as either wrestler in this match, goes to great lengths to talk about the back injury, even explaining that Shawn has a, quote, 6-inch bar with screws holding his back together. He also explains Shawn and Paul Diamond's history as American Force, making Venom sound bitter about being left behind. You have to wonder as the match goes on just how injured Shawn might be when Venom cracks a crutch over Shawn's back, still early on in the match. More so later, when Shawn hits a pile driver, then slingshots Vader into a ladder. These seem like they would take a huge toll on the back injury. Once Venom takes control again, repeatedly hitting Shawn in the back with a bin, the two fight their way up onto a balcony of some kind, where Shawn hip tosses Venom off a rather insane looking height through 2 tables on the floor. Once the two get back to the ring, Venom throws powder in Shawn's eyes and handcuffs him to the top rope. As he attacks Shawn with a cane, it looks like all hope is lost, which draws out Shooter Schultz, one of Shawn's trainees, to help him. Shooter suplexes Venom onto a table twice, then a powerbomb, 3 times failing to break it, leading Shawn to finish the task by power slamming Venom through it, again bringing to doubt that back injury. Shawn then hits Sweet Chin Music and pins Venom for the win in a near 15-minute match. While the match was very fun to watch, it certainly was not the Heartbreak Kid of old, nor Mr. WrestleMania in that ring. In the April 10th Observer, Dave Meltzer would describe it as a basic weapons match, and he would make note of Shawn's elbow drop off a ladder being, quote, his only big bump in the match. Far more notable is his clairvoyance in describing it as Shawn's final match in quotations, as he would go on to enjoy 8 more years as a full-time wrestler. He would also go on to not enjoy that match in Saudi Arabia, but we try not to bring that up anymore. One final, really notable thing in the match was the commentator making mention of Shawn's newborn son. So far I've deliberately focused more on the wrestling side of Shawn, and not on the personal issues he faced around this time. But many people do consider those troubles to be the real reason he was out of the ring for all those years. In his own words, he was influenced by his wife, who was raised as a Christian, to finally escape those troubled years. In a 2017 testimony, he claimed that her faith drove him to want to be a better husband and father. He describes a specific moment when his then 2-year-old son recognized that he was not all there, and this was the catalyst for him to make a massive change in his life. To quote him exactly, "It's the weekend, and I'm getting myself into a little bit of a haze. My son's crawling on me, and I can hear him faintly say, 'Daddy's tired,' and for the first time ever, I realized he's 2 now, and he can see that there's a difference in me, and that hits me like a ton of bricks." He sees now. In an October 2022 interview with Logan Paul on the Impulsive podcast, he would add, "It broke my heart. It's the first time that I realized that this little guy, he was only going to look at one person to show him how to be a man. And that was going to be me. And I was, on that moment, I was screwing it up." This would be the beginning of Shawn finding his faith. He begins to attend a Bible study group, and again in his own words, he reads the sinner's prayer and began weeping. Whether you believe in such things or not, Shawn clearly did. I'm skipping ahead a bit, but when Shawn made his eventual comeback at SummerSlam 2002, he wore a tank top with the words Philippians 4:13, referring to the verse, "I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me." Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.